So for those of you who don't know, Zach and Chandler are our two co-moderators for the young adults group. So thank you so much for running this group and keeping it going. And yeah, I think maybe, well, why don't we get going? Because we're recording this and people will be able to catch up on things if they're not able to join us in live today. But so Zach, I'll turn it over to you to.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining today. We'll be discussing how to get trial ready. We've got June from the Society. We've also got Leann from the University of Rochester, where she's a clinical trial research or project manager rather. And so really appreciate both of them taking the time to join us here today and help us understand what it takes to kind of prepare ourselves for these trials that we've got coming up. So June and Leann, did you have prepared remarks?
Yeah, we have some things prepared. I will just say the topic today is trial readiness. So as many of you probably have heard, there are some really interesting drug trials going on and some starting up later this year, early next year for FSHD. And I'm referring specifically to the ongoing trials. Fulcrum is in a phase 3. That's the final phase before you go ask the FDA for approval. And they are about to finish collecting all their data. It's been almost a year since they enrolled their last patient. So that one you can't enroll for because it's already pretty much done. But we're really excited to see, what the results are. And then the second trial that's going on is from Avidity Biosciences. And they are in the middle of what's called a phase 2 trial. And it's kind of confusing because they've broken it up into different types of phase 2 trials, different, B, C, D, something like that. So we do know in June they announced their kind of preliminary data from a small number of patients in phase 2, and it looked really interesting. It was very exciting. And they are going to start recruiting again. I think that they're shooting for by the end of this year for like another another arm of the phase 2 trial, and then another one beyond that. They're looking at first half of 2025. So
yeah, I believe when I got in contact with them at my site, they said it'll be around October or to start recruiting.
Yeah, October, November, thereabouts. You can never be sure, as Leann will probably tell you, because it takes a lot of different moving parts to get a clinical trial to actually, to activate it. But what we wanted to address today is, there's obviously a lot of patients are wanting to get in these trials, and it's kind of this moving like, where's it going to be? And what we are here to do is explain how the process works a little bit and explain what you can do as a patient to give yourself the best chance of being enrolled in a clinical trial. So that's what today's about. And I'm going to turn it over to Leann because she has enormous experience in this area, as the University of Rochester has probably run more clinical trials of FSHD than just about anywhere else. So Leann, it's all yours.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I do this right. It's always roll the dice. Can you see this?
Yes.
My PowerPoint. Good. So yeah, just again, I'm Leann Lewis. I've been working at the University of Rochester since 2015, and only in FSHD research, actually. So Dr. Rabi Tawil hired me, and I've been his main research coordinator up until he retired at the end of June. But I'm working with many other neurologists at the University of Rochester who Dr. Twill trained and made sure know FSHD inside and out, on the clinical side of things and then also on the research side of things. So right now, Dr. Johanna Hamill is our main neurologist who is running the clinical trials at the University of Rochester. And she was trained under Dr. Twill. She's been working with FSHD patients for probably the last 8 years or so. And she's really excellent. She's got a really great bedside manner, and I've been working with her for several years on the Fulcrum trials and now on the Avidity trials. And she's a really good doctor and pays good attention to everything. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then I feel bad because we're having a meeting with Avidity on Friday to have more details about Cohort C that they want to come out. So I'm sad I can't share them with you tonight, but this is part of the reason I'll get into it about why you want to get in with your local site and talk with the researchers so that you can ask them those questions and say, hey, I know you had a meeting, what came of it, and get some of that information. So hopefully this is not gonna, all right, I'll do it this way. I'm not used to this computer. Okay, great. So where do you start, right? You want to get involved in research. You hear about this great trial. What do you even do? Like I said, you want to make contact with your local site. Back in 2016, we started the FSHD Clinical Trial Research Network. Dr. Twill and Dr. Statland in Kansas. You've probably heard of both of them, hopefully. Both got together, and then me and one other project manager, we all worked together to get this started. And now we have about 28 sites around the world, which is amazing because it gives more people with FSHD the opportunity to participate in trials. And as you can see, we have 16 in the United States. So as you can see, we're trying to have them spread out as possible. We do the best we can to get other parties interested and involved, but there's only so much arm twisting we can do for some of these neurologists to get them excited about FSHD research, just because there's a lot of other things that they're doing. But I'm pretty proud of the work that we've done for the last 8 years, getting this together so that it makes more opportunities for more patients. So I would suggest going to the FSHD Clinical Trial Research Network website. It's through Kansas University Medical Center. I didn't put their link because it's very long, but if you just Google FSHD Clinical Trial Research Network or even FSHD CTRN, you will find it. And then there should be contacts on there as well for finding your local site and getting in contact with them, because then you can try to establish a relationship with them, or at least let them know, like, hey, I'm local, I'm interested, sign me up. So that's always good. Talking to your neurologist is always helpful. If you have a neurologist, I think it's important to be seeing a neurologist once a year, regardless of treatment, but because treatments are seemingly around the corner, as much as I can say, it's going to be important to have that established, because you're not going to be able to have someone write you a prescription for something if they don't have you established as a patient with FSHD. But typically neurologists are knowledgeable about the trials, or can at least connect you with that information. And then there's other ways you can obviously keep up to date on trials, like clinicaltrials.gov. You can type in FSHD and then it will list out what's available. Are they recruiting? It's usually up to date, but sometimes it's like, it still says it's actively recruiting and it might be done. But it's not real-time updates. There's also Google alerts you can set up that can tell you about what's going on with FSHD publications and other things like that. Sometimes I have patients who call me and ask me about things that I didn't even know about just yet, because they're right on top of it. And that's really nice. And then I always say the FSHD Society, not because June's on, but I think they're an excellent resource with their website, their newsletter, their email. They really provide a lot of great information about the trials and all of that. So, and they do a good job of connecting patients with each other as well. So if you wanted to talk to someone else about their experiences in a trial, things like that, I think it's a great way to network and kind of just keep yourself in the loop, because it is kind of difficult sometimes to know what's going on if you're not actively engaged in multiple ways.
Quick question. So
Sure.
the map shows quite a few locations. Most of those involved with each of the trials, or is it just a few of them?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So the map there shows quite a few different locations. Do most of them get engaged with each of the trials, or is it more?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have set up this network because at each of these sites, we have study staff who are already trained in performing the different tests and procedures and are familiar with FSHD and have the proper equipment, so that when pharmaceutical companies come in and say, hey, we have this great drug we want to try out, these sites are ready and waiting. We can't guarantee that the sponsors are going to pick these sites as, you know, their choice for, you know, for locations, but they typically do. We have a lot of natural history studies that the trial network also does on their own, and so all of these sites will be involved in it for the most part. At least the United States ones will. Sometimes Canada and Europe, based on their laws and other things they have going on, they might not be participating, but typically most of these sites are participating. And then, you know, and sometimes.
If you look on clinicaltrials.gov for each trial, it will actually list the sites. So it's not 100% overlap. And also there's some sites that are not part of the network that a company might engage. So it's not a perfect match, but there's a very high chance that one of the CTRN sites, you know, or many of them will be picked for a trial just because they're kind of a known entity. The company can see and say like, oh, these folks have the infrastructure and the staff to be able to support this trial.
Mm-hmm. So some questions that you might want to consider too before enrolling in a study. I know a lot of people like to call them treatment trials, and it's such a misnomer because we can't be guaranteed that it's a treatment, because typically there's a placebo branch where you're getting saline or a sugar pill, so it's not the actual active drug. And oftentimes people are like, get me in. And I'm like, yes, but you have to also consider that, you know, it could be a placebo as well, or it just, there's a lot of various reasons before jumping into a trial. So just some things to consider, like what is required in, you know, the involvement in it. Like how many visits are there? How long is each visit? Are they multiple days? Is travel required? Because that could be a lot on somebody who's in school or working or both. If travel is very difficult for you and the nearest site is a flight away, are you able to do all of that kind of travel? I mean, you know, so cost is usually covered by sponsored studies where they try to mitigate travel costs. They'll pay for hotel and airfare and or car rental or mileage. But, you know, obviously it's very taxing on people who have fatigue and muscle disease. And so that's something to consider as well, because like, for example, the Avidity study is 20 visits in 48 weeks. And in the very beginning of most trials, it's almost like every week you're coming in. And some visits are 2 days where you come in and do, you know, several procedures. And then the next day you do the infusion. And then that's a whole day thing too. So it's always good to consider, are you able to do that time commitment? And that's always a good question to ask someone when you're if you express interest in a specific trial. So the time commitment is the other part of it, as far as, you know, all of that I was just saying. And then also I would like to point this out, especially for young adults. If you are willing to, if you're planning on having children, you cannot get pregnant or get someone else pregnant, usually months prior to a study and then months after. They usually say 9 months after a study ends, because obviously if you get someone pregnant or you become pregnant at the end of the study, there's a potential that the study drug is in your system and could affect, an unborn child. And we don't know the effects of these drugs on unborn babies. So they don't want anyone to be to getting pregnant, and then you have to kind of agree to that as well. And sometimes they want to document, what kind of family planning that you're using to make sure that that doesn't happen during the trial. So that's something that I also want people who are young to consider. Like if they're like, oh, well, we're going to have one more baby, or, whatever it might be, you might have to think about that, because it would be through the course of the trial, and that could be 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4 years. So I know that's changed some people's minds about starting to participate in trials as well. So just something to think about. And I'm sure there'll be a million other questions based on your own personal lifestyle and all of that might come up. But that's why it's good to have a conversation with someone in the research, team to ask them about the details of the study and see if it's a good fit for you. And then, sorry, I did have additional questions. I felt like it was short. And then the next one is, are you okay with completing the necessary procedures? So in FSHD, some of the standard procedures are MRI and are biopsy, muscle biopsy. I'm going to use some generalizations because I can't speak for all trials and all future trials, of course. But right now, these are kind of some of the standards that researchers are using to understand whether or not a potential therapy is working, or other certain tests and procedures are working in people with FSHD to reduce the DUX4 protein and all of that. So MRI is really important. We use stronger magnets in our research. So even if you had a hospital MRI, it doesn't mean it's safe for you to do a regular research MRI, because it's twice the magnetic strength. And so, that's, again, something that's really important. If you have a pacemaker or wires or plates or stents, those are something that you need to be clear with the research team about to make sure it's safe for you to participate, because safety really is the number one in all of these studies. Some metal is okay. If you have documentation, that's super important. So as part of being ready, trial ready, if you happen to have something implanted in you, or you have a plate or a screw, you broke a toe and you have some screws in your toes or whatever it might be, it's always good to have those records and of what specifically the metal is made out of, because then you can just hand it over. And if it's something like titanium, which is not magnetic, then you're safe to go on the MRI. Sometimes people have dental implants, that's okay too. But again, we really need those records. So part of being trial ready would be getting some of those medical records ahead of time. But then again, that's what your study team should talk to you about too. But it's always helpful too, especially when it gets to be more time goes along. It's harder and harder to get records because some doctors' offices don't keep the records for a certain period of time, and it makes it more difficult to get them. And then biopsy. I've witnessed many biopsies. I've never gone through one myself, so I can't really speak from that perspective, but most people do pretty well with them. But I know some people are like, absolutely not. Like, I hate needles. Like, I can't do blood draws, all those kinds of things. That's something to think about as well. And then, also there's always potential that there might be some side effects. We do our best to make sure that we're obviously clear about what potential side effects there are, but sometimes, some people are like, it's causing me extra fatigue and I'm not able to go to work, or I feel nauseous, and, things like that. There can be all these potential side effects that could happen that the study team tries to be clear about, obviously, in the beginning when we're consenting you. But there are also other potential side effects that we don't know, especially when it's the first time we're testing these drugs in patients with FSHD. So that's also something to think about. And then, like I said a little bit earlier, like, are you willing to take a placebo? Some people are just like, just put me in the drug group. And unfortunately, that is not an option. It's going to be a randomized, blind process where we don't know who's in the placebo group and who's in the drug group. Obviously, we want all of our patients to be in the drug group, but it's also something that you have to be willing to do, and that these placebo drug group studies tend to be about a year. So you could have potential where you're on placebo for just a year. So you go through all these visits, you go through all these procedures, these tests, biopsies, MRIs, lots of travel, and you're on placebo. So that's something to consider too, and that it's not necessarily a treatment trial and that you might not be getting the treatment. But the good news is that typically, and again, a generalization, is that they will then, after the placebo arm of it, then they'll do what they call an open label extension, where they put everybody into the study drug group. And then we know everyone's on it, and then they, continue the study that way. So it's kind of one of those, like, you might have been in placebo for a while, but now, you're sort of guaranteed, depending on the protocol, that you'll eventually be in the drug group. But you have to realize that you're giving up a lot of that time.
Can I just comment on this? So first of all, it's super important to keep in mind, although we call these, promising drugs or treatment trials, these are experiments designed to figure out if this compound is going to work. So it's not a treatment in the sense that it hasn't been proved at all. But the only way to figure out if it's effective is to go through these trials. And so being in a placebo arm is incredibly, participating any way at all, whether you're going to be in placebo or not, you can't think of it as like, I'm either going to be on a treatment that's going to help me or not. It's really, I'm part of this experiment that's going to try to prove that this is a treatment that can help all patients. And the more quickly people can enroll and we can complete the trial, the more quickly everybody will have the answer to that question. So the goal is not that's out there, whatever it is, even if it's unproven. The goal is, let's get a treatment we know works to as many people as possible, as soon as possible. And I say that from personally, I was in a clinical trial where it turned out I was on a placebo, and it was not an industry-funded trial. I had to pay out of pocket for travel, for staying in New York City for 10 days. And actually for part of I didn't have to pay for the treatment, but there was not an open label extension. So I didn't even have a chance to do the treatment afterwards. But what it did do was that the group was able to complete the trial and publish it like a few months after I've, completed in it. And if people didn't step up to do that, this study could still be going on and unpublished with people not knowing anything about it. So I just wanted to say that, being in a placebo, you're making an incredibly important contribution.
Right. Yeah. I try to remind everyone this is research, right? Because again, like that misnomer of it's a treatment trial. And I'm like, it's not treatment, but this is again, research. We're trying to figure it out. Some people get upset about the inclusion, exclusion criteria and say, I don't understand why you're excluding people who are older than 65 or why you're excluding people who, who aren't ambulatory. And it's they have to have very narrow parameters to make sure that what they're studying is accurate and there's no other factors that are affecting it, because otherwise then it's kind of all for naught. So there are very specific reasons why they design these things the way they do. But again, it's all research. But we've really learned a lot of amazing, great things, even from trials that have failed. Acceleron was one several years ago that you might have heard about, and it failed, but it didn't, right? Even though it's not on the market, it taught us a lot in the research community about what types of medications we should be looking at or which ways we should be targeting FSHD. And that was a success then. So I thought that was amazing, because even though they shut it down because they're like, this is not working, we still were able to learn so much from it.
On the point about the trial parameters being relatively narrow in terms of who can get in, do you anticipate them potentially expanding some of these trials based on kind of the addition of MRIs and new functional tests?
Yeah, I really don't know. I think they're just gonna keep things the way it is. The criteria have to be a little bit narrow to make sure, like I said, again, that there aren't other factors that are affecting it, right? Because I know you can argue, well, a 65-year-old, you could put 5 65-year-olds in a room and, some are in great, excellent health. Some are, advanced disease. Some don't even have symptoms, all those things. but they have to have some kind of cutoff, because then it's like, well, where do age effects happen? And they can't do under 18 right now because, of minors being a vulnerable population. There's a lot of factors. And then they're also kind of like the clinical severity, like being right in the middle. I always joke that the sponsors are like Goldilocks. They don't want you to be too strong, but they don't want you to be too weak. They don't want you to be too old, but they don't want to be too young. They want everyone right in the middle, so that they can eliminate any other possible factors that could affect the data.
Mhm.
So again, it's really where you would talk to the study team about the inclusion exclusion criteria and see if it fits. Does that answer your question?
That's helpful.
Okay. Yeah, can't make any guarantees about what's coming up and all that. And sometimes sponsors decide to change their minds about things, but we'll see. Let's see.
Well, the decisions are informed by research from the natural history studies.
Yeah.
So, and often people like, well, if I'm not going to have a chance to take a drug, I'm not interested in that study. But those studies are so important because that's how like in a group of 30 people who look like this over 1 year, what changes could you see? And now you want to give a drug that's going to maybe slow it down, but you need to know what you're measuring it against. And if you don't know, for example, people don't know what it looks like for people over 65 because there just haven't been enough studies in that group, and they don't know what it would look like in someone who's in a wheelchair because there just haven't been enough people in wheelchairs who participate in these studies and things like that. So there is a reason behind the exclusion inclusion criteria, and it's really got to do with what data do we have available from studies that have been done to give us confidence that we're picking the right population, the right ways of measuring the change, and right age groups and so on.
Right. So this actually goes perfectly into my next slide as, am I eligible? So this is going to, again, I'm going to give this disclaimer that it's a typical criteria or general. It's not what fits for every single trial, but this is what I've seen very commonly in a lot of our natural history studies and a lot of the trials that we have going on. So again, like ages 18 to 65, genetic confirmation or diagnosis, like so having a doctor just saying, yes, based on your physical appearance, you have FSHD, plus a positive family history. So you have other family members, usually immediate family members like a parent or a child who also are positive for FSHD, which shows that you most likely have it. And then, of course, usually sponsored studies will also include genetic testing to confirm that as well. And then we always want you to be able to walk at least 30 feet without the assistance of another person, and no wheelchair use, because there's certain clinical evaluations that we do or functional assessments to see, how much time does it take you to walk 30 feet? And then we keep charting that over the course of the study so that we see if there's improvement, then great, maybe the drug is working. And if there's not, maybe it's not, or you're on placebo, that kind of thing. So again, that's also why we have these criteria, because we need to be able to measure a change. And if you're too strong and you're at the top level, we're not really going to see too much of a change. But if you're also too weak, there might not be enough of a change to measure. And again, these are all generalizations, not to say that someone who uses a wheelchair can't, improve or do other things, but these are just, unfortunately, criteria that we have to just kind of use in order to help narrow down the field so that we can have specific participants. Usually they say no cancer diagnosis or undergoing cancer treatment, just because that can also affect your body. Sometimes they also don't want you to be taking any kind of statins or steroids that affect muscle growth, because again, it's like now we don't know if it's the study drug that's helping you or if it's something else you're taking. And then they just say in general too, no major medical conditions, like if you have like a major heart condition or breathing issues or an orthopedic issue. Again, these are things that we would go over with the study team to talk specifically about, to see But usually, as long as you're in generally good health besides the FSHD, then it's okay. And then controlled conditions are allowed. So what I mean by that is, like, if you have diabetes, but it's controlled because you're on medication, or you have hypertension or high blood pressure, but it's controlled because you're on medication. Like, those are usually fine. Like, those are not considered major medical conditions. And that, because again, this is all about safety as well, and making sure it's safe for you to participate, because we don't want anything to happen or, bad to any of the patients. But we, might want to make sure that you're staying safe and healthy throughout as well. Your medications is going to be something that we're going to want to look at. And again, it's going to be very specific to the study about what they're including and excluding. But having a list of your medications and what you're taking and what you're taking it for is going to be important. A lot of medications are typically included, and don't exclude you from it, but that's something that you can also talk to your study team about. I talked about this earlier, MRI safe, again, making sure that you are able to do an MRI, and that if you do have some kind of metal in your body, that you have records of what kind of metal is in your body and what's it made out of. Muscle biopsy, again, we talked about this earlier, in that you need to be eligible to have a muscle biopsy, and that isn't determined until you come in for a screening visit. So we wouldn't be able to tell you over the phone. Maybe if you're seeing your neurologist in person and they're like, hey, you might be really great for the study because they literally physically have their hands on you and they're able to kind of, palpate, like, this would be a good muscle for biopsy, like, you would definitely be eligible. That's also another reason why it's good to see neurologists, because then they actually have data on you as far as, are you eligible? Do you meet criteria for these upcoming studies? And then able to draw blood. There's usually blood draws at every single visit. And some people are very hard stick. Some people just, you can't get blood from. I've actually had to, unfortunately, exclude somebody from being in a study because it was impossible to get their blood from them because of past medical history. If it makes you woozy, maybe that's fine. We can do things like lay you down and give you a cool cloth, that kind of thing. But if you're passing on at every single blood draw visit, it might not be for you. But that's something to consider as well.
If somebody would generally be a good fit, but they take some medication or something like that that could prevent them, what's the typical timeline where they have to be off of that to potentially fit?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on what the medication is. And again, that would be something that the study doctor could talk to you about. And again, if the study doctor is your neurologist, that really helps. But usually it's like 30 days max, that I've seen. But again, it really depends on what the medication is. And then sometimes we've talked about going on alternate medications as well. So it still treats the condition, but it's not this particular compound that would affect what they're looking at. So sometimes it's not like you have to go off all your medications. Like, please do not do that. Please wait and talk to the study team before you do anything in relation to your medical treatment, because we want you to be able to keep your medical treatment, your exercise, your physical therapy, any of that, all stable and consistent throughout the trial. And we don't want to disrupt things too much, because we want to keep you, again, healthy and safe. And we understand that everyone has, different things. But it's just a matter of, like, it just depends on what specifically the study might be looking at and what their specific parameters might be.
One question, we had a roundtable discussion a few months back on scapular fixation, like, I can scapula against the rib cage. Would that prevent somebody from participating in these? Because it might hinder the ability of the researcher to measure movement if it's fixed.
I'm sorry, I'm just having difficulty hearing the question.
Yeah, so for the scapular fusion surgery, would that prevent somebody from participating?
Yeah, no, thank you for repeating that. Yeah, so scapular fixation surgery, yeah, that's typically okay, because they use titanium wire for that typically, and that's okay in MRI. So that, again, would just be something that you would share with the study team to make sure. And then again, having records on that in your hands, like, it's always good to have copies of your medical records just in case, especially if you move, or, you don't know if the doctor is going to, like, up and retire or leave the practice, that kind of thing. So it's always good to have copies of those records, especially if you have scapular fixation surgery. Always have copies of your genetic results. Save them digitally somewhere, have them hard copy in a file, in a fire safe box somewhere. But it really is super helpful to have all those records on your own. Yes, we can contact your doctors, but sometimes doctors take weeks or months to get back to us, and it's a problem to hound them. But when a patient's like, look, I have it, and you're like, excellent, like we can move on, right? Like we don't have to sit and wait anymore. So that's super important to have that. But usually, yeah, people who have scapular fixation surgery should be okay. I haven't seen that as an exclusion criteria just yet either, because I know they do things sometimes like reachable workspace you might have heard of, where it's measuring arm rotation or like arm range of motion, and that has not come up yet as being an exclusion criteria. So, but it would be something that we would note. Any other questions about that?
I have a question on biopsy. So never had biopsy. What does it involve, and how, I guess, lack of a better word, how inconvenient is it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I usually go into this in great detail when I talk about these studies, but with patients, but I can go into it now, obviously, is I think it's a relatively simple procedure. We do it right there in the research center. It's like an outpatient procedure. There's no need to, get you, into the hospital or anything like that. Typically, the research doctor does the procedure, but they might assign someone else to do it. And so it really depends on the location as well. So I can't necessarily speak for every single research site, because they might have you go to a different place to go have it done, whereas we can just do it right there in the same room where you did all your other procedures. And our doctor does the biopsies, and what that entails is when we do the MRI, they determine which muscle is the most ideal based on fat percentage, based on muscle percentage. They typically try to go for a healthier muscle so that they can get muscle tissue, and it does heal and it does grow back. We would never do a procedure that would exacerbate your condition, that would make it worse for you, that would lose healthy tissue. Because I know, you're like, I want to keep all the healthy tissue I could possibly, keep. But that's why we go for a healthier muscle, because it's more likely to grow back, and not exacerbate, your condition or have any issues. And so far, I haven't heard anything from anybody saying, coming back late, years later saying, how dare you, like this made it worse for me. It's very, very small. Like we take extremely tiny pieces of muscle too. Like we say about the size of a pencil eraser, if that. And we take about 2 to 3 samples of that. So collectively, it's all about, that amount. So it's very small. And what we do is we just, clean the area, of course, make it all sanitary. And then we numb the area with lidocaine. So that's probably the worst part is the lidocaine shot into the skin and then into the muscle. But it numbs everything very quickly, and it's all local, and you're awake for it. Usually I'm just talking to the patient, trying to distract them from what's happening. Some people get very excited and want to record it. It's kind of to each their own. But then the doctor will just do like a stab incision. So she'll just take like a little scalpel and do like a 1 centimeter incision, just enough to get the needle in. So it's a needle muscle biopsy. It's not an open biopsy. Some sites insist on doing open biopsy, so that's something to ask about. But we typically like to do needle just because it's so small and it's easy. And we have this new device now where it's like almost like a big machine, and she just puts the needle in, and it goes in and grabs the pieces that it needs, and it's done within a minute. The actual procedure part of it, getting ready for everything takes longer. And then it pulls out a couple little pieces of tissue, and then we bring it right to the lab that processes the samples and then sends it off for analysis. And then afterwards, they just do compression, obviously, to stop the bleeding. And then once that happens, they just usually take Dermabond glue, like a medical grade crazy glue, basically, and which is because they don't need stitches. It's such a small incision. They just do some glue on there. And then we usually just, as an extra precaution, have you just lay there with your legs elevated for 20 minutes to prevent any extra bleeding or bruising, and then we do a compression wrap as well for just a couple hours afterward. But most people are good to leave right after. Again, we give you some Tylenol so that you're okay. And Tylenol is usually the most people really need as pain control afterward. The next day, they usually feel like maybe they're a little sore, like maybe they get like bumped their shin on the coffee table or something. Because we usually go for one of the muscles in the legs, just to because they're bigger and they're closer to the surface of the skin, so we don't have to go very deep either. So people usually just say, "Oh, I just feel a little sore," and we usually just say, "Take it easy the next day. Don't go running a marathon." But usually people are fine to resume activities, and we've had patients drive home several hours right after the biopsy, all those kinds of things. So it's pretty tolerable.
And how much bruising or permanent scarring does it leave?
I haven't had anyone say anything about bruising. There's always a little tiny scar, like that little 1 centimeter stab incision leaves like a little tiny scar. But sometimes when you come back a year later, if we're doing a second biopsy, sometimes it's hard for us to even see. I mean, obviously it depends on every person. Every person heals differently, or scars differently. But sometimes I can't even tell where we went last time on somebody because it just heals so well. But then there are some people who just have that little tiny scar. And that's kind of it. But we always call the next day too to just kind of make sure, because anything major would happen in the first 24 hours. So we always call as a safety precaution. And I would say, 9.9 times out of 10, I've had people say, "I'm totally fine. Like there's no problems. I have no, redness, no swelling, no bruising, no major pain," that kind of thing. Everyone does pretty well with it. I've only had one person say like, "Oh, it kind of opened up again and started to bleed a little bit." And so then they just took some steri strips and put it on there and it was fine again. But that Dermabond glue just acts as like a little Band-Aid for about a week, and hangs on there. And so then by the time it falls off, everything's all healed. Hopefully I didn't scare anyone about that. It's pretty well tolerable. It really is. And I can't tell you how many I've witnessed at this point, but it's got to be somewhere at least 100. So, and again, everyone's done pretty well with it. I haven't had anyone report any major issues with that, because that would be paperwork that I would have to fill out. So I would know about it.
Yeah, just as an example, I had one for Move Plus on this gym, and it was pretty straightforward. Haven't seen a scar.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you know by now, FSHD patients are tough cookies, so I'm sure we can handle it.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I mean, seriously, the FSHD community has been like one of the best patient communities I've had the pleasure of working with, because I don't know, there's just something about you guys, and like all of our nurses and like other staff at the hospital are like, "You just pick out the nicest patients, don't you?" And I'm like, "No, it's just, I don't know. I think there's just an extra disposition about people with FSHD, especially those who are obviously willing to volunteer, right? You just all are awesome, and you make our jobs so much easier." And it's just funny because they're like, "Yeah, we work with other patients," and they're like, "Not like that." They're like, so it's kind of funny. But yeah, so I'll move on since we're trying to, I'm almost done with this. But yeah, so this is some of what I've already kind of talked about too, is, what can you do while you wait? Get your genetic confirmation or diagnosis if you can. I know sometimes insurance doesn't cover the testing, so that's unfortunate, but at least get in with a neurologist, and get that diagnosis down in your medical records, as long as it's as long as you have other things in place, as far as like long-term care insurance, if that's what you want, and things like that. But yeah, so, and then sometimes even getting genetic confirmation results of immediate family members. So if you already know like someone else in your family's gotten the testing, like asking permission to have a copy of their record too that you could share, as proof that you have FSHD. And then, like I said, I've said this before, but seeing a neurologist at least once a year, it helps you inform you of clinical trials, helps discuss if you're potentially eligible for a trial, and can help facilitate genetic testing. And then also participating in non-clinical trial studies. June kind of touched on this, but these studies have really been helpful. Like some of you might have heard about the MOVE FSHD study, that is, not it's non-clinical in that we're not doing a study drug. We're just getting more information on patients with FSHD. But it's going to be one of the largest FSHD studies ever. And we have so many researchers that are just interested in the data that we're collecting and the samples that we're collecting. And we share all of that with them because we want everyone to get to a solution sooner than later. So we don't hesitate in sharing that, but those data are so important, and some of them have already informed protocols. And that, it's like, oh, don't bother with this test because we've already, shown that it doesn't give good results, or we've already validated this test. So yes, make sure you always include this test. We did an MRI study years ago. I think we published in 2016 on it, and that's where MRI came from, and that it was showing that we could see DUX4 lighting up in the muscles when it was expressing itself. And so that's what led to all these protocols now, including MRI. So you can either be excited about that or mad or about it, because I know it's not always easy to be in an MRI, but it's great in that we learned from this natural history study, though that's one of the tests that we need to be doing in order to see the effects, behind the scenes kind of thing. One of the major questions I get from some people is, can I get the drug without enrolling in trials? Can I just go to this country and get it? Or can I go down to the corner and ask for this drug? And the answer is no. We can't offer any amount of money to these sponsors for these drugs as much as we would like to. We have to obviously go through the proper channels to make sure it's legally and safely and all that tested. But there are other things going on right now. So I had talked about the open label extension studies, and that's again where you would have to enroll in the trial, and you can't jump into the middle of the trial where they're now doing open label where everyone's on the study drug arm. You'd have to still go through that whole process of, there's a chance that you could be in the placebo arm and there's a chance that you could be in the study arm. But then if they have it planned already in their protocol, that you will eventually go into the open label extension. But like June said, there's other studies too that don't necessarily have that as a plan. And so they won't include that. So for example, Avidity also, they did the placebo versus study drug group study. And then since that went well, now they've added on the open label extension, because if it didn't go well, they wouldn't continue it. So we couldn't guarantee everyone was going to eventually be in the study drug group, but now they are, and so now all of our subjects are going to be going into that and getting the drug, definitely. So we'll see what happens after that. There's also something called expanded access or compassionate use. And that is where we can try to appeal to the sponsor and the FDA to allow them to give the drug, even if it's not FDA approved and it's still in the trial, allow them to give it to patients with FSHD. And so this is a big process. Sometimes sponsors have this built in. They typically don't, because it doesn't provide them a lot of information, because there's not typically data collected from this part of it. But this is more of like, if there's no other treatment out there and it's deadly, they'll agree to provide it because there's no other thing to do right now. So this isn't a common thing. We are actually working on this right now to get access for kids with FSHD for some of these drugs, because we are waiting. We can't get trials in kids for various reasons. But we are trying to appeal to the FDA to get expanded access for kids for some of these trials, the drugs that are in these trials right now. So there's those potentials, but it's not an easy route. So that's kind of where we're at. I just like to address that. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. And then I just like to go over this really quickly too. Sorry, June, if you want me to move on, I can do that too.
No, you can go through that.
Good discussion though.
Yeah.
But yeah, so also I just like to go over this too. Like when you're enrolled in a study, so like so this is what happens. So you contact the site, you say, hey, I'm interested, I'm local, I'm, eligible, all that. You've had discussions with them. then they typically go ahead and schedule what's called a screening visit. They need to actually physically see you in person to tell you if you actually meet the eligibility criteria. And then you would go in person and complete those screening assessments. And it doesn't mean you're in the study just yet. You just are in this like preliminary kind of visit. And there's a potential that you can screen fail, which means that you are not eligible. Like they do the MRI and they find that you don't have a muscle that's biopsiable, or you're, I don't know, on some medications you can't go off of. And then you're not able to be participating in the study. There's a lot of various reasons people screen fail. But then if you pass the screening, that means that you have met all the eligibility criteria. And once you hear that you have passed the screening, and then you are officially enrolled in the study, and then you start the study. So I've had some people think, well, oh, I did the screening visit, like, but then I didn't hear from anyone after that. And it's like, that's not typically what happens. They should inform you if passed or failed, basically. But I just like to point that out, that there's always a screening visit that needs to happen in person for us to determine if you're eligible for the study, because we can't determine everything over the phone, and we can't determine everything in like a clinic visit. Any questions about that?
What would your perspective be on people that are interested in joining the trial, reaching out to several sites if they're willing to travel?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that might be in here. Yes, establish a connection with a site coordinator. So, I think it's really important. I have a lot of people who contact me, and I usually say, if you haven't heard from me in a while, feel free to contact me in a month or two. It's not that I'm trying to ignore you. It's just that I'm just trying to do our regular work and trying to get things going. But, I might not have information for you now, but I might have information for you in a couple months. So I think it's always important to find somebody in the research network that you can talk to on a regular basis. I talk to people from all around the world, whether or not I'm going to recruit them. It doesn't even matter. It's not for me to necessarily say, oh, these are my people coming to Rochester. I'm like, if you're out in Philly, I'll try to find you a site in Philly. If you're out in Kansas, I'll try to find you a site out in Kansas. Those kinds of things. Like, I'll try to connect you with the right people so that it's more local for you, or whatever. But I don't mind, talking to you about, studies, or answering questions and things like that. But it is good to try to do your local coordinator would be, especially if they're like, hey, we have this coming up. Are you interested in coming, like next month for a screening visit? Asking them what the next step is, like, what's the anticipated timeline to recruit? Like, what do you need me to do right now? Like, if you already have given them everything they need and they know you're eligible, or, you're probably, most likely to be eligible, then, it's a matter of like, what do you need from me right now? Is it just to wait, or, and that's why I say usually, like, just contact me. And because it might not be, I'm ready to enroll just yet, or I'm in the middle of enrolling, I just haven't gotten to you on my list yet. And it's good to remind them of your interest. Like, if I haven't heard from someone in several years, they might be off my radar. I mean, I have a list, but again, everyone's different how they do it, but I feel like the squeaky wheel gets the oil here. So I think that's important to, just contact them every so often and just say, hey, how's it going? Still here, still interested, whatever it might be. Because sites might be more selective when they're recruiting. They might only pick their patients that they see in clinic. They might only pick the people who participated recently in another trial because they have those records. I can't control what other sites do, but I do have to say that we have to be a little bit more selective, just because we have so many people, which is excellent, because we were at the point where we were begging people to be in these trials. But I would still say, don't let that discourage you. Please get your name on someone's list, on everyone's list. I always say contact more than one site and get on everyone's list. Like, if you're in New York City, contact Philadelphia, contact Kennedy Krieger, contact Richmond, Virginia, contact Boston, contact us, whoever you're willing to travel to. Like, if it's 6 hours, no matter what, which way you go, then contact everyone in your 6-hour radius, whatever works for you. But I always say, don't fight for the site, make the sites fight for you. Because I'd rather compete. And we've had that a couple of times, where a patient contacted us in UMass, and UMass was able to get them in sooner. And I'm like, fine, no problem. I'm happy you got in, because I'm like, I'd rather that than find out like I didn't get you in soon enough and we lost, our other screening spot or something like that. So never wait on just one site if you can. And then that's all I have for right now. I did put my email in here and my phone number. Feel free to take it down. Feel free to shoot me an email. It's probably a little easier to get a hold of me that way versus phone, but I'm typically in the office Monday through Friday anyway during normal work hours. And I always try to return calls, by the next day if I can. But if you have a quick question or something that came up today that, you didn't have a chance to ask, feel free to shoot me an email.
Excellent. Would you mind sharing your just sharing your number and the email again?
It's can you see it in the screen or not?
Oh, sorry. I don't
Sorry.
think the screen is
Okay.
sharing anymore.
Oh no, hang on.
I was seeing it. You could put it in the chat, Leanne. And while you're doing
Yeah.
that, we're out of time, so I just wanted to make a few comments. So in terms of trial readiness, I think, excellent points, but I think the most important thing for a lot of people, we know that they haven't seen a neurologist, and then people who are in a family with FSHD may kind of self-diagnose and not realize they don't have a formal clinical diagnosis. So again, I think getting your medical records is really a great first step to figure out if a doctor at some point in your life diagnosed you, if you had the genetic test. And it's important to do these things sooner than later because there can be delays along the way. Like, you send an email to the medical records place, and you don't hear from them for a month. And then it turns out, some a whole different company is doing the medical records, or you need to pay for it, or all kinds of things can happen. So, just get going on that sooner than later. If you have not seen a neurologist who has diagnosed you, that is something to get going on immediately, because the wait time to get in to see a neurologist can be, I have heard in some cases it's over a year. And more typically it's going to be 4 or 5 months. Not kidding. I mean, it takes a long time. So you cannot wait until you hear that the trial is starting. You want to be ready by having gone to the neurologist or having that appointment, getting that diagnosis. If you've not had genetic confirmation, that also helps, even though the trial will generally retest everybody because they're doing a controlled experiment. They got to double check, they don't take anything at anyone else's word, but they want to know that they're looking at a pool of potentially eligible people who already have had a clinical diagnostic test, rather than a random group of people who may or may not have FSHD, right? So having that genetic test is important. And again, you need to first get to the neurologist and then have them order the test, and then it could take another 3 weeks to 3 months to get the results back. So, and I know doctors, a lot, if they're not familiar with FSHD, may really be stumped by how to order the tests, how to fill out the paperwork. That can really slow them down or stop them completely. And meanwhile, you might be losing your chance to be considered for trial. I mean, this has happened to people I know, so I'm not making that up. And I think, as Leanne said, make the sites compete for you. So every study coordinator, everyone who's at these sites whose job is to start recruiting for the trials, they're going to have a list, and they are going to start with the patients they know. So make sure you're one of the patients they know, right? And I think those are probably my key takeaways. And then make sure you're reading our e-newsletters, because we will always announce when trials have started. We will geo-target, like if you are within the Rochester area, we're going to send emails. And Rochester, as soon as they start recruiting and they say, hey, we need more patients here, we're going to send out an email blast, or wherever it is in the country you are. We work with the study sites to help recruit patients. So pay attention to your emails. and stay connected through groups like this. This is like a great way to, be up to speed. And that's
Yeah,
all I gotta
especially if
say.
someone's like, "Hey, you heard about this?" And it's like, "Oh no, I haven't." It's always great when someone else is like, "I heard about this and I'm sharing it with you."
Mhm.
So yeah.
All right. Any questions? And Leann, can we share your slides
Yeah, no, that's
later?
fine.
Okay.
Yep, I can send
Okay.
them to you again if you need to.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I do have them, so I just want to make sure it's okay to share them.
okay.
And
All right.
Natalia, did you have another?
Yeah, I was really excited to hear that there's a site in Philadelphia because I was based in New York City. I thought that Rochester was my only option. So I'm just wondering, does Philadelphia have, do they have a clinic sort of like how Rochester does? Like a
Yeah,
FSHD clinic?
yep, University of Pennsylvania does. Dr. Colin Quinn is their doctor, but I do know that they only recruit their patients. So I've had some patients in New Jersey and New York City area and Long Island who are trying to get in as a patient with Dr. Colin Quinn so that they can eventually, do the trials there. Because again, these trials are usually pretty intensive. So some people are like, yeah, I don't mind flying up to Rochester, but it is a lot, especially in the wintertime, those kinds of things. So it really is a lot easier. I encourage people to try to find a site that is hopefully within a reasonable driving distance, just because of the intensity of the
Yeah.
visits.
And if you're wanting to be referred to a specialist outside of your state, outside of your healthcare network, that will take time. You usually need a referral from someone in, whoever your regular physician is, or someone with a rationale, like why are you referring this patient to, go across state lines and see somebody in Philadelphia. So all of that, you have to kind of factor that in.
And just one more question, because I know that you had mentioned that like Avidity was 20 visits over 48 weeks. So would all of those visits be at the site that you're doing the trial with, or would some be like a visit to, like each of those visits would be to the site?
So you would have to stay at the site. Like you wouldn't be able, sometimes you can transfer, but we don't typically allow that. But like you would have to do everything at Rochester. But then now they're trying to build in home health visits where it's just like a quick blood draw and an EKG. And so we can contract with some nurses that are local who can come in and they're part of the study as well. And they would do those visits like at your home or at a specific location that you wanted to do that at. And so they're trying to build that in, but there's like 4 of those visits, so that there's still 16 visits in person, right? But they're trying to do as much as they can to alleviate that pressure, that stress of trying to come out to on site every single time.
I think Scott had his hand up. Is it? We can't hear you for some reason. You're not on mute, so there's some.
Maybe you can type your question in. Yeah, so list of sites, like again, like June had said earlier too, if you go to clinicaltrials.gov and you find the study that you're interested in, it will tell you who's part of the trial. Sometimes they have the contact list, sometimes they don't, and that's kind of annoying. But I know like Avidity had like a generic patients, at aviditybio.com email that you could just contact them and say, hey, I'm in California. What sites are in California near me? That kind of thing. And then they would give you the contact information. But some other sponsors aren't so great at that. But again, also it sometimes helps to talk to other researchers because you can say, hey, I know you're in New York, but do you happen to know anyone who's in California? And I can say, yeah, sure, I got this. So, and then June just put in a link.
Yes. So, and you can always call us since we know everybody as well. And
It's true.
and the link I just shared with you in the chat is to our page on clinical trials. So it lists the ongoing trials. And if you go to each of those pages that we have, you'll see the direct link to the clinicaltrials.gov. So you don't have to go through the step of searching clinicaltrials.gov to find the right trial. And we have a program called FSHD Navigator, which also you can contact. Their information's on our website, and just say, here's where I am, and I'm interested in trials, and they can help connect you to the right people to proceed to see if you're eligible and all that. So yeah, that's so I hope that was useful and helpful to everybody, and you can always reach us if you have other questions. And we have recorded the session, so we'll kind of post a cleaned up video on our YouTube channel for you to refer to later. And that's it. Zach, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for both of you taking the time.
Yeah, it's nice meeting you all.
Good to see you all.
Good
Thank
to
you.
see
Good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Quick question for June.
Yes.
Where do we access the slides for this one and previous on the FSH side? I haven't had luck getting the slides.
Let's see. I'll think about, you know what? Once the video's up, we'll put together a blog post and include the slides. So there'll be like a package that has all the information you need. So give us about a few weeks. All right. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to know where to look for it. Okay. Thank you.
On our blog. Okay. Bye-bye.
Safe travels,
Thanks,
June.
Leann.